Thank you for being here. We want to have some information sessions to share information about some decisions that we need to make relative to the new elementary school that we're building over on the Austin Road campus, and so that's what we'll be doing tonight. We'll be together for about an hour. I want to go ahead and show you what the agenda will be. So, whoops. There we go. So we're doing a welcome. I'm going to do some introductions to let you know who is here. Then we have a presentation that we've put together that I think will answer a number of the questions that people have on their minds. We may not get to all of the questions in terms of the presentation, so we do have a specific part of our agenda where we will get to additional questions, both questions that have already been submitted and questions that you may submit during the course of the night tonight. Some of you, I noticed, have already found the QR codes that are here around the room. We'll put them up on the main screens as well when we get to that part in the agenda, and you can submit questions that way. We will be monitoring those throughout the evening, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can this evening, and I'll talk more about questions when we get to that part in the agenda, and then we'll wrap it up. So first I want to introduce to you the people that are here. First I'm going to start with our Board of Education members. We're really pleased that they're here. Ultimately the decision will be theirs to make, and so I want to introduce to you, to my left and your right is Beverly Kelly. She's a board member from District 4. To my right we have Jordan Raper, who is board member at large, and Lisa Maloof, who is District 3. So they'll be listening to all that goes on here, and that'll be part of the decision-making process that they will have in a couple of months, in a month or so. I also want to introduce to you a few other people that are here. You're going to first of all, I'll start to my right. Shinley Roundtree. She has a long title that I have since forgotten. She deals with strategic partnerships and communication. Director of Communication and Strategic Partnerships, I believe, is pretty close. And so she's going to be monitoring the questions as they come in, and she's going to help me get to as many of them as we can. Moving on around, right here in the green shirt is Jason Ayers. He's our Director of Transportation, so he's our expert when it comes to dealing with transportation-related questions. Joe Purno, our Assistant Superintendent for System Operations, which one of the main things that they do in their area is build new buildings. And so a lot of what we're talking about is the work that he is doing. Dr. Chris McMichael, our Superintendent, is here in the center. Moving on around is Dr. Matt Thompson. He is our Chief of Staff. And I'm Ken Green. I'm Assistant Superintendent. Come on, Ms. Stevens. This is another board member, Ms. Lynn Stevens. She is District 5 representative. That may not mean much to you. They're all working together to make decisions in the best interest of our school system, and so I wanted you to know who is here and their names. And so we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to turn the agenda over now to Matt Thompson.
Well, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. As Dr. Green said, our goal today is to lay out the two options that have been proposed for what we might do with the new 10th elementary school, which will be the 5th elementary school for the Appalachia cluster, to kind of walk through why we're having to do this expansion, why we needed a 5th elementary on this side of the county, and talk a little bit about the different models that have been proposed and what those might look like. And then at that point, we will open that up for questions, and Dr. McMichael will also talk a little bit about what a 4th and 5th grade academy, which is one of the models that's been proposed, would look like. So to start with, why did we have to build a 10th elementary? Because Barrow County continues to grow. We have been, over the last 5 to 10 years, growing at about 1.5% to 2% students a year. That translates to, in a given year, around 200 or 300 new students spread out among all of our schools. And that's a pretty manageable rate of growth, but eventually you do reach a point in which your buildings start to fill up. And we'll see some of the ramifications from that in just a second. What you will see, though, on this particular, I know it can be a little hard to see, so I'll try to zoom in here. Back in 2018, we had about 13,800 students. As of today, we have more than 1,000 more students, 14,916 in just about a 5-year period. That's a significant amount of growth. And even more so, if you look closely, we actually had a little bit of an enrollment decrease during the year of COVID, which was not uncommon. Most districts in the state saw a bit of a decrease during that period as a lot of families chose to homeschool or do different options and things like that. But what you'll notice is we have gained between this time last year and this year right now, we have gained nearly 600 students in a single year. That's a rate of growth closer to 3.5%. And that's a lot. And if you've ridden around this part of the county, and particularly this part of the county, anytime you've seen a lot of development that is happening. And when we look at the numbers and what's coming, when those neighborhoods get finished, they get filled, we realize that we are already pretty crowded and we're about to get a lot more so. So therefore, it becomes necessary to remove some of the pressure of building a new elementary school. We actually did this for the Winder-Barrow High School cluster in 2018 when Winder Elementary was built, which was the 5th elementary on that side. Appalachia's side since has seen just as much, if not more, growth, so the time came to do a 5th elementary school. So as we were talking about ways we might use that elementary, through our school governance teams and other methods, there were a lot of ideas for ways we might do it slightly differently. The original plan had been to have a traditional K-5 elementary school. That still might be the way it happens. But we also wanted to look at other options that might be better for our students, for our families, that we could try, because in Barrow County we like to be bold and try different and new things when we think they would benefit our students and families. So to start with, this is the enrollment numbers for our 4 elementaries in the cluster in 2018. So you can see Auburn Elementary, where we're at now, had about 760 students in 2018. Bethlehem had about 763, 813 at Kennedy, and 839 at Yargo. If I move that forward to this year, Auburn actually has not had as much growth as the other 3 elementaries in the 4 elementaries in the cluster. And the reason I bring that up is we'll get into one of the 2 reasons why, when we talk about doing a potential 4th and 5th grade academy model, why we might do Auburn's on site as opposed to having it with the other 3 elementaries. Because if you look at the other 3 elementary schools, they have seen pretty significant enrollment increases. Kennedy has actually added more than 100 students over the last 5 years. And I'll point out, none of these schools had a lot of room in 2018. They were already pretty cozy, already pretty tight. These are students that have been added in. And what that necessitates then is we have to add modular units, or what we sometimes call learning cottages. And these are units that are external to the school, and they are really nice if you've never actually had a chance to look at one. They're actually very well made. Students can't really tell much of a difference, but still, it's not optimal. And what you can see is, as the result of the growth at those elementary schools, Auburn Elementary now has 7 modular units, Bethlehem has 6, Kennedy has 23 modular units. That is a significant percentage of Kennedy Elementary students that can't even physically be in the building because the school has gotten so large. They have to be in an external unit, 16 at Yargo. So that creates a situation where we really have to build a 5th elementary to try to relieve that pressure. Now, here's what I want to show you, because this is important. I mentioned there were 2 reasons why Auburn is not part right now of the proposal for the 4th, 5th Academy, but would instead host its own 4th, 5th Academy, which Dr. McMichael will discuss in just a second. And that is, this is a map of the Appalachia cluster as it currently stands. So if I zoom in on these, this is the southern part of Barrow County. You can see Winder itself is right here. Fort Yargo is right there. The Auburn zone is right up here on the western side of the county, and you can kind of see 316 is the road that runs right through here. And you can see Auburn is this zone, Kennedy is this zone, Yargo is here, and then Bethlehem has a very large geographic cluster because that part of the county is not nearly as populated as is the others, but that's changing rapidly. Now here's a key point. Notice where the new school is. The new school is actually very far to the east, almost into Oconee County on the south side. Now why is that? Well, we would have loved to have built it somewhere right here in the middle. Would have made everything much simpler. But unfortunately, we have to take land where we can find the land. And we're competing with developers and everybody else to find land to build schools on. And in this particular case, we had the Austin Road property, which is where BASA is at currently. If some of you have students or have been out to BASA, it's where Lanier Tech, where Sims Academy is located. And there's a lot of room on that property, and it made a perfect sense to build another school there because that was the best land we had at the given time. And so, unfortunately, it is not optimally located, which when we got to looking at a 4th and 5th grade model, and our transportation director will discuss this shortly, one of the things we found was to bus students from the Auburn zone, as it's currently constituted, over to that new school would have necessitated students being on the bus a long time. And we have generally tried to keep bus rides to be no more than 60 minutes and actually hopefully much less than that. And it got very challenging to figure out how we could actually get students there and not have them spend a significant amount of time on the bus. So what would this look like in terms of, we're going to start out by talking about the 4th, 5th Academy model, and then we'll talk a little bit about a traditional rezone. So Dr. McMichael, in just a second, will talk a little bit about what a 4th, 5th Academy model is, but essentially, in a nutshell, it just means the 4th and 5th grade students from Bethlehem, Kennedy, and Yargo would all go to the new school and be at the 4th and 5th grade academy there. We would replicate the 4th and 5th Academy model here at Auburn so that they would have the same focus on that particular age level, the curriculum, all the things they're doing. Well, you can see here, this is a little hard to follow if you're here, but I'll try to read these numbers out. That's our current enrollment numbers. So if we took this year and pretended like we have that model in place right now, so if we looked at, okay, if the 4th and 5th graders at Bethlehem, Kennedy, and Yargo were already at the academy, how would that change the numbers? Well, in this case, Auburn would obviously stay the same because Auburn would stay a K-5 school. Bethlehem would drop to 573 students, Kennedy would drop to 619, and Yargo would drop to 603. That's pretty significant drops from where many of them are at now. Kennedy and Yargo are pretty much right at or above 900 at this point. So that would be a significant amount of pressure taken off those schools. The new elementary school, the 4th and 5th grade academy, that would have those 3 schools, 4th and 5th graders, would have about 882 students. So it would be the largest of the 5 elementary schools. And that's if we had that model in place today. So that's one method for taking the pressure off, would be to use that model. And what I'm going to do is let Dr. McMichael now talk briefly about what a 4th and 5th grade academy model looks like and why we think that's a potentially exciting model for kids.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Thompson. Glad to see you all here. The 4th and 5th grade, Matt gave you a pretty good, quick overview, but if you all know, things for kids have changed, and especially when it comes to things such as some of the mental health and some of these other things. In 4th grade, back when I was an elementary principal, I've said it back then, that 4th grade to me was more like 6th grade had been in previous years. A lot of changes come on at that point. Classes also get larger at the 4th grade piece, so it's kind of a natural break in a lot of ways. A lot of school systems, granted smaller ones, but do already do a primary, younger grades, and then either a 3, 4, 5 or a 4, 5. So it's not an unknown model by any point. Working with type of things that curriculum-wise for instructional coaches, that type of thing, it creates a little more chance for more focus on what the 4th and 5th graders need versus what kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd. Teachers in the audience know there's a vast difference between what goes on in a kindergarten classroom and what goes on in a 5th grade classroom. It's just a whole different level these days. And it also goes back to looking at counselor that could be dedicated just to 4th and 5th, these type of things. So a little more chance for specialization. One of the drawbacks is it is another transition for kids going from a school to another school to another school. Do want to point out in the pictures up here, these are our, what we affectionately call the pod out at BASA we already have. And for speaking directly about Auburn and what could happen here, this was what we would be talking about. It wouldn't just be a collection of single-wide learning cottages out back. Once you're inside over here, you don't really know any different from being inside the BASA classrooms and hallways. Very, very well built, very nice, very safe, And so this would be what we be discussing if we decide to go this route and do a hybrid type model here at Auburn. So really just that's a quick overview. There's a lot of instructional opportunities. I've been asked about research. There's research both ways, just like with everything else. You can find research to support the pluses. You can find research that support the negatives. But it's just, again, one of those things that we just wanted to, we're always on a mission to try and find the best ways to serve our students and to serve our families. I know we brought this up with the principals. They were excited about it. Actually, the principals in the other cluster over at the Winder Barrel got wind of it. Now they're kind of excited about it also and wondering if it works out well here, if we go that route, if we would want to do it over there. And the answer would be yes. If it works out better for our kids and teachers and everyone else, then we definitely look at replicating it. Another thing I'll point out too is we tried many, many different ways to figure out with just the distance between the new school and Auburn. But the way we're growing, we'll be building another school, probably our 11th or 12th, number 11 or 12 elementary, and be our 6th one on this side in what I call the near future. Now, my timeline's a little different from others. That might be 5 or 6 years, and then we would probably have that closer, and then we'd be able to split. By that time, I would imagine our growth would be where it would, just an example, be Auburn, Kennedy going to one school, and then Bethlehem and Yargo staying at this school. So I'd love to say that this is our last change, the last time we're ever look at rezoning, but the way Barrow County's growing, unless there's just something disastrous that happens with the economy, it's going to be this way, rezone after rezone for the next several years. So keep that in mind also. So, have I missed anything, folks? Okay, great.
Very well done. So that's the academy model. And I know you may have many questions about that, and as we discussed, there are plenty of ways for you to interact and ask those questions, and I encourage you to do so. So that's the first model we have on the table. The second one would be a traditional rezone. Dr. McMichael mentioned there are a lot of school districts that use alternative grade bands, whether they be 3rd through 5th, 4th through 5th, K2, etc. Most schools in elementary are K5, or pre-K5. And in this case, that would be the other alternative. We would simply take the new school and we would make it a pre-K through 5 school or K through 5 school. And that school would then have to be rezoned, which means the attendance zones that determine from where you live, what school you go to, would have to be changed. But part of the issue when you do a rezone is you really end up having to change almost all of the zones on that side. It's not just going to be one school affected. It's going to be pretty much everybody is affected, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. Because to make it work, you have to balance the enrollment. You have to get it to where you have fairly equal-sized schools. Otherwise, you don't actually solve the problem that we have with our growth. So in a traditional rezone, in order to balance the enrollment, many students from all grades and from potentially every school would be moved to a different school, but not necessarily the new school. It's not a guarantee that a student rezoned in a rezoning would go from Auburn to the new school. As a matter of fact, I can pretty much guarantee you students that were rezoned from Auburn would almost certainly be going to either Kennedy or Yargo, just based on geography. So that's a process. If we choose to go the rezoning route, there is a committee put together. The committee looks at all different kinds of configurations and maps. They try to find, and it's not just balancing the enrollment, it's also balancing poverty levels, special education levels, all kinds of different things that go into that. So that committee has a very hard job, and they have to try to find what's the fairest way to redraw the zones for all 5 schools on the elementary that will enable that kind of a balancing. So I want to point out, this has a giant red draft on it because 2 things. One, we have not decided to rezone yet. We're still deciding between a rezone and a 4th, 5th academy model. Additionally, this is just a pure balancing the numbers, nothing else. A rezone committee would have to look at this, consider a lot of alternatives. They may come up with something very different than what we're about to show you. What we just tried to do is to do the simplest model to balance the enrollment between the 5 schools, to be transparent with you guys and show you what areas of Auburn's zone would likely be up for a rezone. So if I go to the next slide, you can see this is the Auburn zone, and what we can see is the area that in a purely rebalancing of enrollment that would probably be looked at first is the area that's sort of to the south and east of the city of Auburn. Those neighborhoods in that area, just because that's the simplest way, number-wise, to balance it. Now, does that necessarily mean that those that are in that blue, darker blue area would be rezoned? No, but that's just probably the starting point. But we share that because we want people to understand on a rezone model, it would be potentially lots and lots of families, lots and lots of students being rezoned. That doesn't mean it's not the best choice. It's just that's one of the downsides of it. There's plenty of upsides to it, just like with the 4th and 5th Academy model. We just want to be transparent with you guys that a rezone would affect a lot more students, whereas with a 4th, 5th Academy model, Auburn students would still be Auburn students, and that really would not change. So that's the particular model there. And so that's sort of where we're at. So what we want to do now, I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Green, and he's going to start talking through some of the frequently asked questions we've already received, and then also give you guys an opportunity to ask your questions. But I hope this has been a helpful introduction to what we're trying to accomplish with these two models. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I would just want to show you a couple of pages on our school website so that you can follow this beyond tonight's meeting. So I'm going to hopefully be able to manage this keyboard. So we have a place on our school website for new school information sessions. If you go to the main Barrow County website page, you'll see some news items across the top. And if you'll scroll to the one across to the right that says new school information sessions, you can get to this particular page. If you scroll down, you will get to review frequently asked questions, and then you'll be able to see we've got them grouped according to general topic area, and then we have the answers that are here that you click on the plus and it brings up the answer to each question. And we have all of that there, and we will continue to update this with additional information as questions come in and as they are answered. But I want you to know that outside of tonight, you will still have opportunity, keep hitting the wrong thing, here we go, to go to the same page, share your question with us, and hit submit. And so even questions that you think of after tonight, we will still get those questions. We will still put together answers and get that published there for you. So, a couple of things that are on the frequently asked questions that may not have come up tonight. I want to talk a little bit more about transportation because there's been several questions about transportation that people have submitted both previously as well as tonight. We'll get to the ones that have been submitted tonight, but I want to let you know that already on frequently asked questions there's been a few transportation-related questions. Some of those are related to would students that are transported to the 4th and 5th grade academy miss instructional time? The question to that would be no. We would schedule the routes to arrive at the school in time for the instructional day, so those routes would start at a time consistent with that. So we would adjust the routes to get to school on time. It would adjust that on the front end. If we choose to do the 4th and 5th grade academy model, then the start times for the 4th and 5th grade academy would be offset to allow parents to be able to transport kids to the elementary school and the 4th and 5th grade academy if that's what they needed to do. We would provide transportation and offer that, but we would offset those times to allow parents to be able to still provide car transportation if that was something that they wanted to do. Were there other transportation questions that we need to get to? Some of the basics, no, we do not plan to shuttle. So we would not plan to have all elementary school students come to their elementary. If we do, and again I say if, there's a dual choice here, but a lot of the questions I think are related to the 4th and 5th grade academy because that's so new. Would we shuttle kids, meaning would we bring them to their elementary school first and then change buses and take them to the 4th and 5th grade academy? We would not plan to do that. We would plan to transport students directly from their home to the 4th and 5th grade academy and transport them home again without shuttling to the elementary schools. So there'd be no additional work on the staff at the elementary school to supervise 4th and 5th grade students who are not there during the day. And the kids would not have the confusion of having to go to a second place, change buses, and then move on. Question was asked about extracurriculars. And all of our elementary schools have extracurriculars, clubs, and that sort of thing that are unique to them. It's not quite like high school where, you know, there are very similar clubs across all the schools. Each elementary school has a different variety of clubs that are available to them. The same would be true if we were to go to a 4th and 5th grade academy. Those students would have extracurriculars at the 4th and 5th grade academy and would not have to be transported back to the elementary school for any kind of extracurricular activities and that sort of thing. Already on our frequently asked questions, can you think of some things, Shinley, that we haven't yet answered before we get to the new ones? Let me just mention to you, if you haven't already discovered the QR code, we're going to pull it up on the screen. There are some, I'm not sure what you call that, sort of yellowish colored, what do you call that color, Shinley? Goldenrod. Yes, I'm not the color expert. So we are going to go back to the PowerPoint. Matt, if you'll advance it, perfect. So we put it up here as well, and so you can either type in the URL at the bottom to a web browser on your phone or device. If you want to scan the QR code, you can do that, and you can submit questions. People have been, and I'm watching them come in here. Sorry, but before we get to those, I just want to see, are there already frequently asked questions that we still need to, that we haven't answered? Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. Jason, I'm going to let you answer that. Here you go.
Yeah, what the plan is, we don't have, or we don't need to add any additional buses or drivers. What we're going to do is we have dedicated BASA routes and drivers that are not obligated to anything on another tier. So what we'll do is facilitate those drivers. We'll fold those drivers in for those routes, so we don't have to add any buses or any drivers or anything of that nature.
So the way I like to think about it is that the first day of school, we're transporting similar amount of students to the last day of the previous year. We've been growing, as Matt showed the numbers, all along. So we've been adjusting our transportation services all along as we're growing. So the biggest difference with either rezoning or 4th and 5th grade academy will be just where they're being taken. It'll still take the same, pretty much the same number of buses and drivers, and we're constantly anticipating and preparing for and adjusting to the growth that comes in. So the trickier part for transportation is just where's the location you're taking the students to. So in a rezoning effort, you're taking them to 9 different elementary schools, generally closer to the address. With the 4th and 5th grade academy, you're doing that for pre-K through 3rd grade, but for 4th and 5th, then you're transporting them a little bit further. So there's a little bit of work to be done that way. And once the decision is made which model to go with, then our transportation staff will jump on that with both feet in terms of designing routes to accommodate that particular decision. Anything else, or shall I move on to the upcoming? All right. Anything else that's already a frequently asked question, or you want me to jump on into these? Okay. Okay, I got those. Okay. So we're going to look at some of the questions that you have submitted tonight. And so the question was asked, the building outside of Auburn near the side parking lot, couldn't Auburn use that for 4th and 5th grade academy? Well, I don't know about whether it could or not, but our plan would be, if we go to 4th and 5th grade academy at Auburn to use the pod that was shown to you, some pictures of that earlier in the presentation. We would locate that directly on the Auburn campus. And as we showed and spoke to you about that really is a much nicer than the separate modular units. It's all in a self-contained building, and so it would be much closer to a building than it would be separate classrooms in our current modular units. What would be the anticipated capacity of the school? The school's being built to the same size as our other elementary schools, and I believe as Dr. Thompson showed, we would expect the enrollment would be somewhere in the 900 student range there if it's a 4th and 5th academy. Okay, I think I've answered, will homeschools have to utilize personnel to watch kids until they can be bused? And we're not going to do that if that's the 4th and 5th grade academy model. I'm going to say if a lot tonight, because the decision about whether we do one or the other will not be made tonight or this week. We anticipate that decision would be made by the first week in December, which of the two models we will pursue, and then depending on that decision, then we'll have to get to work on working out the remaining details depending on that decision. So you're going to hear me say if a lot tonight, because it really depends on which model is shown. Okay, moving on down. If you go with the Auburn Academy, it seems like the facilities will still be shared with all 700 students, so there'd be no relief for lunch schedule tightness, and all the specials would be shared by the 700 plus students. It seems just like a cluster of classrooms pulled to a different place, but all shared zones and schedules wouldn't change. Can you explain how this might affect specials and lunches?
Well, I think one way, with the way the pods are set up, there would probably be about 12 classrooms, and currently right now, 4th and 5th in Auburn is, how many do you have?
4th and 5th grade classes.
9. So they can be configured different ways, so there might be a possibility to have a smaller, take what would be about the size of a 2 or 3 of the of a normal size trailer, just to use the kind of the basic that we can all kind of visualize, and turn that into a place to eat for 5th grade or 4th and 5th grade, or have them actually have their meals out there. So there are some options with the size that we'll be putting out there. Would be actually a larger space for 4th and 5th than they currently have at this point. So there would be some chances to do some reconfigurations on that, on classrooms, and some other things too.
Okay. So the question is asked, if students can ride to Bassa, why can't students from Auburn attend the new school? Fair question. And I would say with either of these options, there's going to be pros and cons. There's not a perfect solution either way, and so regardless of which model is chosen, there's going to be some things that are effective and good and solid about those. There's going to be some things that people don't like about that. Our thinking with the fact of not including Auburn in the new campus 4th and 5th grade academy is in fact just the length of transportation, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. I'll try to be a little bit more detailed in the response. The kids currently going to Bassa are older kids. They can manage those rides a little bit better than younger kids. I know there's not a huge difference, but that would be one difference. The other difference would be that there are likely situations where a parent would want to drop off a younger student at elementary school and then transport them to 4th and 5th grade academy, and Auburn is situated in a way that's just tricky. It's not touching 316 to make it really easy to jump on that from this school and get over there. You're going through winder to do that with traffic in the morning and that kind of thing. We're really working hard to try to make sure students aren't on the bus for extended lengths of time. Even those that may already be on buses for longer than an hour, we're constantly working to try to cut that down to less than an hour. And so while we appreciate the fact that it's not the same, we feel like given the factors that are available that the location of the Auburn attendance zone makes it a little more tricky. Again, that's a final decision that will get made by the board. But the thinking at this point is that the location just makes that travel time a good bit less than ideal. And again, all of the questions will be shared. Our board members will be aware of all these questions as they make their decisions, and they'll see that there are concerns related to those particular areas. Okay. So, wouldn't it be difficult for the Auburn students going into middle school when all the other fifth graders in the cluster will have been going to school together for 1 to 2 years? They will all have relationships with everyone going in the middle school. So it is true that if the 4th and 5th grade academy model was chosen and Auburn 4th and 5th graders stayed on the Auburn campus, that they would not have had opportunities to make friendships with the 4th and 5th graders from the other schools. But at middle school, they will go to Westside with their current Auburn 4th and 5th grade peers. So half of that new incoming 6th grade class at Westside would have been at Auburn together. The other half will be coming from the 4th and 5th grade academy, leaving potentially friends that they did make at 4th and 5th grade academy and rejoining their Auburn classmates at Westside. So, yes, there would be some separation, but there's also some benefit to that as well, as are many of the considerations that we're talking about. There's pros and there's cons. What are the negatives for the 4th and 5th grade academy? Many positives were shared. It is being presented that there are far more downsides to rezoning. Most often mentioned how difficult it will be for planning, which is to be expected when you're planning for what's best for students. So, let's talk about some of the possible negatives for the 4th and 5th grade academy.
Well, I think you just kind of hit on one of the big ones is and I mentioned it briefly earlier, the extra transition. Right now you go from elementary to middle to high. If this were to go into effect, the schools that would be going to the new school, they would be going from, basically primary to elementary to middle to high. So there's an extra piece in there, an extra transition for kids. There's also what we were just talking about, Dr. Green was just talking about, the piece that they'll come together, the other 3 schools would be coming together for 4th and 5th, and then they'd be splitting back apart for 6th, 7th, and 8th. I would imagine the Kennedy group would meet the Auburn group at Westside, and then Yargo and Bethlehem, and the new school would wind up, or not the new school in that scenario, but those 2 schools, their 4th and 5th grades, would be at Heyman Morris. So there's that split up again as part of that transition. That's a negative for that. Again, transportation even for Kennedy's a little bit longer than we'd probably like to see it in some ways too, as far as that goes. So to me it's really kind of equal. I mean there are pros and cons both ways. There's there's a lot of benefit staying with the tried and true, the pre-K through 5, because that's what we're all used to. Parents are all used to it. Even probably more importantly, teachers are all used to it. So that's a change for the teachers. One thing, the one constant in the world is change, and the thing about change is pretty much 98% of people don't like it in some form or another, and we're definitely part of that group too. We would love them all to just stay the same and would not have to upset the apple cart at any time, but that's just not the reality of where we find ourselves right now. So I think there's just a lot of good pros. I mean, there's another one that's been brought up is it kind of goes back to the transition piece again, but you have a strong school culture here. I would assume after it's built out, you'd have a strong school culture at the 4th and 5th grade level, but that does take some time. We've seen that with Winder. It took a little while for Winder, which now has a great climate and great kids coming out of there, of course, but it took a while because whenever you bring in a new school, you're bringing teachers and staff and kids and parents from all other schools, and they have to create their own new culture. That's going to happen either way, but it's it's a little bit different when it's just the 4th and 5th grade parents versus the others. So I think with both models, there's a lot of pros and a lot of cons. It's just really comes back to, and the author of that question ended it up with that last sentence, is what's best for our kids overall. There's always going to be individual things that affect individuals and individuals' families that we can't plan for and we can't think about in advance. We always try to address those as soon as we know about them. But whenever you're rezoning, and I've done more than I'd like to think about, you're always going to have those pros and cons on a kind of a large scale, and then pros and cons for each individual family too, and each individual teacher and everyone else. So it's a very tricky process, and it's one of the reasons we've really taken our time with it. I know we've had a little behind, a couple of weeks behind where we would like to be in the decision process, but we wanted to make sure that we were very transparent and very open, and made sure that we try to hear everyone that wants to be heard and make the best decisions on our level so the board can make the best decisions at their level.
Okay, thank you for that. And it is a difficult decision. And there are trade-offs is one of the ways that I like to think about it, is that you are getting something that you want, that you see as a benefit, but you're also accepting some things that are a negative as well. And that's true with either of the options that the board may choose to go with. Moving on to some other questions. Isn't it putting unnecessary stress on current 4th and 5th grade teachers to relocate to a school possibly further away from their residence? I'm going to answer this, but I want it to apply to more than just this particular question, because this assumes a 4th and 5th grade academy. The same could be true with rezoning, because now we have to staff the new school with a set of teachers, pre-K through 5th grade. And so because students would be rezoned from the existing schools to go there, there would be teachers that would go there as well. We hope all by choice, but it might not work out that way. So either decision could put stress on teachers. But it's not just stress. With change can be positive or negative. It could be exciting. Most of the time when we experience change, it's not preferred, even good change. It creates stress for us, and in many cases it's not the preferred change that we would like at the moment. But some people relish change. Some people like new beginnings. And so it really depends on the particular people that are involved. And would we rather be able to accommodate growth with the existing buildings, the way they are? Probably so. But that brings its own set of problems. Even if the buildings were large enough, now we've got traffic issues and parking issues. And again, cafeterias won't accommodate those number of students and some other things. So even staying the same and making more space at the existing buildings comes with its own set of complications and things that are different. So we certainly want to be understanding for people that are affected by this. We want to make the best decision possible, the one that we think is in the best interest of our students and our staff. But we understand that any of these possibilities is going to involve change for somebody. And we want to be as careful as we can in making those adjustments and as patient and as understanding as we go through that. But no, there's not an option that doesn't create change and stress for some group of people. I wish there were. Will additional staff be added to Auburn to account for additional growth that is sure to come to our area? Yeah, staff is typically allocated based on student enrollment. So as student enrollment grows, then we allocate staff to serve that student population, whatever needs that they bring. We submit 2 reports each year to the state, and this is a drastically oversimplification of how this process works, but we basically tell the state every year how many students we have and what services they're getting. That's called FTE, or full-time equivalent. We also submit a report called CPI, which is Certified Personnel Inventory, I think, something like that. And it basically tells them what teachers we have and what roles those teachers are playing. And then the state takes that information and puts it into their formula, and they allocate an amount of money that we get from the state to fund positions throughout our district, teaching positions, support staff positions, and those kinds of things based on the enrollment that we have. That won't change. So as the enrollment at Auburn increases, then those allotments are sure to increase as well. And so as new subdivisions are built and as those students move in and enroll in school, then those will increase those enrollments, and then we allocate teachers based on student enrollment. So some general comments about planning for growth. We are constantly planning for growth, and we're looking out as far as we can possibly project. Growth and developing a new school, and Joe can probably give you some more details. So Joe, if you want to work your way up this way, you can. But first of all, as we anticipate growth, we have to find land and we have to buy land. And if you've been paying attention to growth in Barrow County, you know that it might look like it's coming from one area and then another area of the county actually explodes. And so we're usually doing the land purchases several years in advance. And we're trying to find land that could be suitable for multiple possible projects. We were really fortunate when we got the Austin Road property, because that property allowed room for a high school, a Lanier Tech, an elementary school, a middle school, and that was really a good find to be able to find something that we felt like was at a reasonable price that we can purchase. And we're constantly being aware of where there might be land available that would be suitable for schools. We do have some constrictions. There are certain places you can't build a school, and there are certain places you wouldn't want to build a school. So when we're looking at finding property, there are some constraints that sometimes make that difficult. But we are projecting out further than we really have evidence of where the growth is coming. And then it takes, 18 months to build a school?
Yeah, so, and we have purchased some property here recently, but as Dr. Green just alluded to, it takes 3 years from designing the school to opening the doors to kids. So it is a lengthy process, but we've purchased some additional property, and we continue to look for additional property to meet the growth demand that we're seeing. Another thing to note is that, we see these mobiles out here, and we get money from the state typically to help us build a school. It doesn't fund the entire cost, but it funds a portion of it. And the state does not allow you to use growth projections to obtain money. They have to see the growth first. So we can't say, well, we think we're going to grow 10% here in Barrow County, and that means we're going to have this many students. They're not going to fund you based on that. They're always going to look back and say, okay, well, you grew this much, so now we'll provide you this level of funding. And so that's why there's always trailers before we get to build new classrooms, and that's just kind of where we are right now with the way we're growing.
Okay, Joe, stay there. There's a couple of
Okay.
other questions
All
you
right.
can answer. So one question is, will the current mobiles be removed?
We haven't made that decision just yet. We're a little bit landlocked here at Auburn. So we believe that this classroom pod would be located here behind the gym, but that's also the play space for the kids. So we'll look at that closely, and we'll determine how many spaces we need to accommodate a 4th and 5th grade academy, and then make a decision about whether or not we take some away, or if we can just add the pod to what we already have. So that was a long way of saying we don't know that just yet.
And related to that, given the projections that Matt already mentioned in the presentation, it sounds like we would already need mobiles at the new elementary school.
We won't be far off from it, and so we've made plans at that site to place a pod there. And I would imagine that would happen pretty soon after the new school opens over there. Yes.
You stay there, but I want to comment on something Joe said. The funding doesn't precede the students. I know that seems illogical because we can look around and see the pipe farms and see the subdivisions where roads are being cut and houses are coming up. And we would think that we can project that we know that typically we get X number of students out of X number of houses. And we can do that. We can tell you, based on previous experience, that if a subdivision goes in with 100 houses, we can anticipate this many students coming out of that subdivision. We don't get state money until the students are already here and are already being served by us, and usually there's a couple of year cycle for that to then eventually show up with money for construction. So can we build schools without state money? We could, but now we got to find the money locally. And it's not something that we want to be having to fund locally when we know that state money will come once we get the enrollment numbers here. So that always puts us in a bit of a catch-up mode. And so, yes, we could open that school and really soon have to put modular units there because we want to maximize the amount of money we get from the state so that we don't have to make that all up locally. Joe, there's one other question, and part of it is your answer, is something you can answer, if I can find it here. Would an Auburn 4th and 5th grade academy have their own gym teacher, library, art teacher, and music teacher? I misread a little bit of that, so you can't speak to the teachers per se, but just speak to the facility aspects of what a pod at Auburn might look like.
Yeah, so these are essentially individual mobile units that are put together on the site to make one building. And it's got an administration area in there. It's got restrooms in there. So you're able to keep the kids in that one location more often than if you had the single wides and they're coming in and out of those. Now, as Dr. Michael said, it gives you a little bit of flexibility. If we have 9 classes and we can get a 12-unit pod back here, then maybe we've got some wiggle room there to use some of that space for an overflow cafeteria or an art room or something like that. We've also been creative at other schools and used some of the existing building as an auxiliary cafeteria. I don't know if we could do that here or not, but we would look at things like that, and we have to. As we continue to grow in the district, we've got to look at creative ways to kind of make everything fit. And just in full transparency, I will say, the new elementary school is being built with all local funds, and that's not typical. But we made a decision that we had to have relief for our elementary school kids right away. And we have 23 mobile units at Kennedy, 15 at Yargo. We had to make that move, but that's not the sort of thing we want to do over and over again. We've got to have money from the state to help offset that cost, particularly as construction costs continue to rise.
So right now, Dr. Green is the hardest working man in Auburn because he's having to monitor all these questions as they come in and answer them. So I'm going to try to help a little bit and answer 2 questions we've had come up a couple of times. One of which is, many of you took the survey that we sent out earlier in September and were wanting to know when we would publish those results. We're also going to, at the end of this session, ask you to take another survey The answer is both of those will be published when we present the findings of that survey, of these information sessions, to the Board of Education. We always want to be transparent with those results. So when those are presented to the Board of Ed, which I'm not quite sure on the time frame, it'll either be the upcoming work sessions or at the end of November. Whichever one that is, they will be publicly presented at that board meeting. They'll be available online. The second thing is we got another variation of the question that Dr. Green also addressed, which is how do we find new teachers for the new school with the teacher shortage? Well, the answer is our own teachers will be going to this school, whether they're coming, the 4th and 5th grade teachers from Kennedy, Bethlehem, and Yargo going to the new school, or whether they will simply be K-5 teachers from all 4 schools, and there's a process for that. But ultimately, the answer is those, with the accepting of the growth that we get from our reporting to the state where we get more funding for teachers, it'll be our own teachers that will be moving on to go follow the students to the new school, regardless of which model is chosen.
Thank you. We'll swap and stick with this mic. We designated this mic as the lead mic for whatever reason. So we're getting close to wrapping up. And what I want to tell you, and sort of as we begin to bring things to a close, is we will get answers to these questions and get them posted on the frequently asked questions site. I know we haven't had time to read and answer every one. We will get them there. Some of the questions are already answered and on the website. I encourage you to go there and read through those. There's quite a number of questions that have already been answered. We'll continue to update that, add to it with new questions. Remember, when you go there, if you have an additional question that you didn't think of tonight, didn't submit tonight, then scroll down to the bottom, submit the questions as you have them. I know there's some that were submitted tonight that we weren't able to answer. Some of the questions submitted tonight are also particular to a particular situation that's unique to you or doesn't really apply widespread. And so those are going to be situations that will be dealt with on an individual basis, regardless of which of the models are chosen, but I think you'll find a number of answers that are there. I think that we're right at closing time. So let me just give you, yes. So let me just tell you kind of in a way of wrapping up a couple of things. Number one, I hope you will actually scan this particular QR code or type in the URL. We want the people who were here at the information session live or who are watching the streaming version of this to be able to give us some feedback specific to this meeting. It's a 2-question survey that is going to ask you, given all this information that you've heard and given what you're thinking about the process, what's your preference now? I think the 2 questions are something like, what was your preference before this meeting? And what's your preference after this meeting? So I hope you'll take time to answer that. That information is very important to us. I will stress to you that none of this is a vote. We survey our parents a lot because we care about, and our teachers a lot, because we care about your opinions and we care about what is important to you. But none of that is a vote. Ultimately, the decision gets made by our board members most of the time, occasionally by our central office staff, sometimes by school staff, but they take into consideration the information that is being provided in surveys. So it's never a waste of time to give us your opinion on a survey. That's always looked at. Every comment is read. And we take that into consideration as decisions get made. So please scan that or type in the URL and take that. This particular survey will close in 2 hours. So you've got an opportunity to get that done. Your ability to submit questions will stay open for as long as this remains under consideration. So time frame, kind of what are next steps and where are we going with that? We've got 3 more of these meetings this week. So we'll be meeting at each of the other 3 elementary schools in the Appalachia cluster. We will have exactly the same format. We'll share the presentation with them. We'll try to answer questions. We'll accept questions. We'll get as many of those answered during the meeting as we can. After that, then we will work to compile all the information and everything that we've learned from the first survey, the information that came in during the meetings, this last post-information session survey, and we'll prepare a report to go to the board probably in the next 6 weeks or so. And we would anticipate that the board would take a vote on which of the two models they think is the right model for Barrow County Schools at this time. And we anticipate that that would happen by early December. Depending on which model is chosen, there's a lot of additional work that will go in if there's a rezone. And so what we would do at that point, if we say we're going to do a traditional rezone, is that we would immediately form a rezoning committee. It would be made up of some parents, some teachers, some other staff from the schools affected, and then we would begin to have meetings to look at the possible scenarios about a rezoning, and we'll consider that information. There would be an additional public meeting to be able to share what the proposed rezone map would look like. We'll gather input, and then we'll take that information back to the board to make a final approval of rezone. If the board were to vote to do the 4th and 5th grade academy, then we would immediately get started on preparing for the 4th and 5th grade academy. Some of those things would include, preparing bus routes and times, start times, because of needing to offset from the regular elementary school schedule. So there's still a fair amount of work to do. If we rezone, we would anticipate that that work would happen during the winter, and that by early spring we would be able to have a proposal, and hopefully pretty quickly after that be able to nail down the school zones, and so we can get that out and published to people, so that you have as much time as possible to know what those school zones will be. Nothing will change until next school year. So everything we're doing now is in preparation for August of 2023. So thank you for being here. We appreciate your involvement. We appreciate the questions. I know there were questions you submitted tonight we didn't get to. We will get answers to that. We have 3 more of these this week and look forward to getting that. And thank you. Our meeting is adjourned.
Okay. Let me just, right before we let everybody go real quick, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I know Monday nights are kind of, especially after a break, everybody's kind of getting back into the mode. I also want to thank, we have, I believe, 61 watching at home. I want to thank them, and I'm sure we'll have many more that will take a look at the recording afterwards. And again, I do want to reiterate what Dr. Green said. We look at everything, and we pay attention to everything. It doesn't mean we can do everything. But we definitely want the best outcome for our students and our teachers. Specifically for Auburn, some of you know this, some of you may not. My youngest daughter actually went to school here. So Auburn's very near and dear to my heart, and we're not going to leave them out in the cold in whichever way we go. We're going to take good care of Auburn just like we do all of our other schools. So I just want to put that out there, and I know the staff members and teachers in all the schools, but may know the ones here in Auburn a little bit better, and in some ways. So just want to assure everyone tuning in for Auburn and hear that Auburn is at the same level with every other school in our decision-making processes, always has been, always will be. And it's just not an easy process. And I want to thank these folks, Dr. Green, Dr. Thompson, Ms. Roundtree, Mr. Ayers, Mr. Perno, and our board members, and everyone else behind the scenes. A lot of work has gone in, a lot of hours has gone into getting us to where we are now, where we're bringing these things to you in the spirit of transparency, and again, needing your input. And are we going to get everybody 100% on board with whatever we wind up doing? No, absolutely not. That would be lovely, but I've never seen it happen in almost 30 years of doing this now. But I do hope and I do believe that once the dust is settled, we've made our decision, and things have been going on for a year or two, that everyone will be very, very satisfied and happy with where they're working and where they're going to school, where their kids are going to school, and those type of things. That's our main mission. That's our main goal. And we're not perfect, but we're going to keep trying harder every day. And we appreciate y'all's time tonight. So thank you so much. Great job, Dr. Green. Thank you again so much. A lot of work.